and welcome to part 2 of my little painting Summer Daydream. We're going to be finishing up this painting in this part and using this reference photo of a field of daisies in a summer country setting. Here's a palette I've been using for this painting. There's basically 2 blues, 2 reds, 2 yellows, Quinacridone gold and titanium white, and from this we can create any of the colors that we want to make our painting. You don't have to choose tube colors for each painting in your reference photo. We'll just mix them up. So you can see I've mixed a nice vibrant green with my 2 blues and cad yellow, and then I made a little lighter version adding more cadmium yellow to it. You always want to add a warmer color, cad yellow or a red, as you go lighter with your colors. You don't want to just add titanium white to get the lighter, more sunlit versions of your color, because it's always going to get warmer as it gets light, and titanium white has the effect of cooling your color off, and you don't want to do that. So I've just mixed up a few greens to get started here in my foreground, and I've already laid in the darks and now I'm going to be just putting in this mass of foliage and flowers, starting at the back and moving forward. So I'm going to just do it layer on layer. I'm using here this little liner brush or rigger brush, and it's just a long thin synthetic brush that's kind of soft, and it makes great little active brush strokes to resemble grasses. You see how I put that mark in there, and I thought, oh, you know, that's too heavy right there and I don't want it there. And what you can do then is just take a little water on your finger or on your paper towel and just wipe it right off. All the layers underneath are dry, so they won't come up. So you don't have to worry about every stroke being perfect as you go along. Just watch what you're doing, and if you put a real clunker of a brush stroke in there, just go ahead and wet it up a little bit and wipe it out, and you can start over. It's the wonderful part of acrylics. They're very forgiving, and you can either wipe it out right away, or you can just let that area dry and come back. You never have to worry about ruining it. So as you can see, when I use this type of brush, I keep my paint fairly wet, has a good amount of water in it so that it will flow easily off of the brush. Here I'm adding some red and some white to that green mixture, a little more yellow, again to lighten it up and to show some of the grasses that are a little more sunlit. I'm remembering that my grasses, my sunlight is coming from the left to the right, and keeping that in mind. Here I've added more red to that color. In acrylics, you can't ever keep a pile of paint till the end of from the beginning to the end of your painting, because it's going to dry out. So instead you tend to just have a pile of paint that you move one direction or another by adding color to it. And as I looked at my reference photo, I could see there was some foliage, some weeds, some that were in kind of had a reddish color to them. And it's really nice to add red to your greens, because they will, the red is a complement to the green, and it will really make the greens pop to have that little bit of red in there. It's just makes it, the whole area, more active and vibrant. And you can also see how those ultramarine blue and the pure colors that I put in the shadow too are going to peek through and add a little bit of that vibrancy as well. I'm just glancing at my reference photo, glancing back and forth, and just seeing, picking up a color or a shape that I see. I'm not slavishly following exactly where everything is in the reference photo and trying to put it in exactly. Instead, I'm just using the colors and then putting elements in that are going to reinforce my painting, reinforce my focal area, and reinforce the kind of shapes and repetitions that I'm trying to create. So here I'm mixing up some blues, some light blues, some grayed down blues. These are going to be the colors of the daisies in the shadow. So again, I'm creating this foreground area by moving from the back to the front, and I'll put more things in front of these shadowed daisies. They're just going to be little shapes that are peeking through the grasses. And I've switched here to a small flat synthetic brush. It's, gosh, only maybe 1/4 of an inch wide, and you could see that as I laid down those brush strokes, I'm just leaving them alone. I'm not blending them out. This is my foreground focal area. I want those edges in there because they're going to bring attention to the area and bring it forward and make it feel like it's in the foreground. So I'm not fiddling with these brush strokes. I'm just laying them down and letting them live there. Once I got those little bits of shadowed daisy flowers in there, now I'm coming back in with more grasses over the top of those as I move forward in my foreground. Some cad yellow, some phthalo blue. A lot of people shy away from phthalo blue, but it's a very vivid, bright color. You only need a tiny little bit of it. And as you're working with these pile of paints and these mixes, the phthalo is very transparent color, and a tiny bit of it will bring your color back into a nice chromatic, pure color. Do you see how when I add the color to the pile, I'm only adding a tiny bit at a time, and that allows me to just move the color in increments. You don't want to dip your brush into the paint pile and then mix a whole bunch into the pile you're using, because you're likely to go too far with the color. So I'll oftentimes dip into the pile of clean paint and then tap my brush off next to it, so I just get a tiny bit at a time to incrementally move the color one direction or another. So now that I put some grasses in front of those shadowed daisies, I've gone to a lighter version of that same blue to put some of the daisies that are more in the foreground. And you notice it's not a white, so when you look at a white flower, it's really, you can't just take titanium white and blast it in there. This is actually a very light blue color still. It's still a cool kind of the shadow side of these daisies. And I'm taking that little flat brush, as you can see, and putting a lot of paint on it. And this is thick paint, it's not watered down at all. And I'm just tapping in those brush strokes, trying to keep that sense of looseness and freedom. I'm going to be adding a number of layers to these daisies on top, some lighter areas and some cooler and warmer areas. So this is just sort of the base shape of the daisy. I'm thinking about the placement of the daisies in my composition. And as I started to talk about a little at the end of the last video, I'm playing with the concept of triangles in this painting, because triangles with their wide base have a very settled, calming feeling to them. And so if I subtly introduce that shape into the painting, the overall painting can give you a feeling of peacefulness, which is what I'm trying to do in this little peaceful country scene. So I have a triangular shape in the mid-ground trees. There's some triangular mountain shapes behind it, and of course the triangular shape of the daisies themselves in the foreground. And I also have my fence post coming off at a slight angle, and that also creates those sort of diagonals moving into that triangle shape. So just playing around with those different concepts. So I'm still laying in these base shapes of the flowers, remembering glancing at my reference photo and seeing how the daisies they kind of, some are facing up, some are facing to the side, some of them are little blossoms. They're not all the same. So I want to remember that and then just lay in that brush stroke and leave it. Again, I want the harder edges in this area of the painting, so I'm not going to go back in and soften those edges. So now I'm taking my Quin Gold and my titanium white, a little bit of that blue that was there, and what I'm doing with this is creating a more sunlit side of the flowers. And you see how I'm thinking about the sun coming from the left, and I'm thinking about what part of the flower would be struck by that sunlight coming from the left. I'm not going completely over all of the shape that I already put down. I'm augmenting it, adding a little more feeling of petals. I don't want for these petals of these flowers to feel like they're drawn on. I want them to have a carefree looseness to them. But I want to develop them a little bit because they are in the foreground and they are my focal point. So I'm just continuing back over and adding this little sunlit side to each one of these flowers. Going back with my Quin Gold, I'm adding Ultramarine Blue to it, some Alizarin Crimson, some more Quin Gold. What I'm looking for here is the shadow color of the centers of the flowers. So the centers of the daisies obviously are yellow, but the shadow side of that is going to be bluer, cooler, darker. So I start by adding this little, starting to create the shapes of the daisy centers by putting down the darkest color first, the shadow color. And I'll be able to come right back over that with my lighter colors and create and develop those daisy shapes. I've moved to an even smaller, thinner brush. It's maybe an 1/8 of an inch wide to create these centers of the daisies. It's still a synthetic, a soft synthetic. So here I've taken the cadmium yellow and the quinacridone gold and the titanium white to make the most bright yellow part of these flowers. Again, as you move from shadow to light, what's in between shadow and light is going to be the most chromatic or the most vivid color. So put in the shadow first, and then I'm going to move into the chromatic local color and add a little bit of that to each of my centers. The paint in the shadow color is still quite wet. You can see, obviously this video is sped up a little bit, but I'm dropping these in very quickly, so the shadow color hasn't completely dried yet, and I'm able to blend between those two colors so I don't have a harsh line in between them. And of course, you know, when you want to blend, you just rinse your brush off and get most of the water off of that, and then you can use it to blend between your colors. Okay, so moving to the even lighter color of the yellow now, more titanium white to it and more cad yellow, and I'm just dropping that in. I don't want to cover up all the previous colors that I've already put down, so I'm just doing a tiny little dab of color again on the left side, or what part of the flower would be hit by the light coming from the left side. And the shadow, mid-tone, light, and highlight, all of those things are going to give shape and roundness to these little daisy centers and make that really, you know, be able to understand that that's a daisy we're painting. Onto that same titanium, adding a little more titanium white to that mixture, so it's a very light yellow, and adding even more little highlighted areas of the white petals. So in those petals we have a light blue, and then we had sort of a mid-range quinacridone gold white color, and now an even brighter and more yellowy color to really get where the sunlight is hitting those daisies. Using that little tiny brush now to add a little bit of these details of the petals of the daisy. Gotta be so careful not to go too far on this, or it starts feeling overworked. And it's fun to do, so it's easy to overdo it. But you want to just try to get in there, lay down that shape, and get out. Don't overwork it. Don't go back on it over and over again. Just let it be. And if some of the shapes are a little irregular, that's okay. That's just going to add to the feeling of looseness of your painting. You're thinking about again, where these little flowers are to create this triangular shape I'm looking for, and just to create a sense of randomness and a natural setting. You want them to be different sizes. Don't make them all the same size. The ones in the foreground are going to be a little bit larger than the ones that are a little further back, but they're also going to be buds and, you know, fully developed flowers, all different levels. So you want to be really sure you don't make everything the same size, but vary your sizes, vary your shapes, vary your orientations, and that will give it a more natural look. Also, connect some of these shapes. You can see how I connected those two flowers, sets of flowers in the top there. You don't want each flower shape all by itself like polka dots all over. You want some of the shapes connected. Okay, so now I came in with it's still my very small brush and a very dark color. I'm just tapping in the little part underneath the flower, the bottom of the flower that's in shadow and the top of the stem. So that's going to be a very dark color, and also that dark color against the light daisy will help to create your focal point. Remember, your focal point is going to be where the lightest lights and the darkest darks. That's one of the ways that we identify our focal area and draw the eye to that area. I'm also using this dark to paint the negative spaces. In other words, where there's white, I'm painting around with the dark, which creates some more petal shapes by painting in around the petals. Just flicking in those stems that are coming out of those dark areas. Again, I want this to stay nice and loose, but you can't have a flower just floating in there. Well, you could if you wanted to, but so I put in some little dark stems, and now I'm coming back with a lighter green to put in the light side of those dark stems. Again, looking at the reference photo for information on the way these stems grow and what they look like and what color they are, not necessarily following exactly where they are. So now I'm taking that same liner brush, and I want a little bit of feeling of leaves and foliage in and around these flowers. So I'm just taking that soft thin liner brush with lots of paint on it, and as you can see, I'm just wiggling that back and forth randomly, which is making little leaf type shapes, starting with a fairly mid green color, and then I will come back with some dark. I'll darken that color up a little bit too. And there we go, to add kind of the shadow sides of those shapes without getting real specific about it. Just want some leaf type shapes added in there. Again, coming over the top of some of the flowers, especially those back shadowed little blue blossoms that are in the shadows, and adding some interest and some activity in the shapes of the dark shapes that still were just plain dark. Need a little bit going right across that fence post. Again, remember, layering and placing objects in front of other objects helps to push the object behind it backwards and gives you a sense of depth in your painting. Just adding some more random looseness to the foliage. Gone with an even lighter color of green now. And in general, as you move forward in the painting, your paint's going to get thicker. So you want to think about that, because you want to try to create some edges and some texture to the paint itself. Acrylic paint has a tendency to flatten out and dry pretty flat. It's not as easy to get thick texture as it might be in some other mediums, but as you move forward, just keep in mind that you're going to put more paint on your brush and you're going to use thicker paint. That also will help bring it forward. Well, I'm pretty happy with those daisies now, so I want to move into the last little bit of this, which is finishing off my fence post. The rail of the post of the fence comes in from the side, and I don't want it to be a straight line. I want it to angle a little bit, reinforcing my my triangular shapes that I'm using in the composition of this painting. So I just, again, it's my dark that I use in most things, Alizarin Crimson, Pthalo Blue, and Quinacridone Gold, that nice, clear, rich dark, and then I add titanium white to it. And as I go lighter, I add touches of cad red and touches of quin gold and cad yellow, again to warm up the color as you go lighter. You don't want to just add titanium white, or your lights will all be cool, which just doesn't make much sense because sunlight is generally warm. I'm softening up the edges, just going back and forth with lights and darks in this fence post, trying to create the texture of an old weathered fence post that's been there for years and years. And the weathered dark texture of this fence post, in contrast to the light fresh daisies, I think adds a really nice element to the painting. I'm thinking also, I'm using my reference photo and I'm thinking about the direction of the light. Remember, when you use a reference photo, photos tend to wash out the shadows, the detail in the shadows disappears, so you have to bring detail back into your shadows, because in real life you will see into those shadows. They won't just be a dark black dull mass. So the sunlight's hitting the side of that. Now I've decided that I made the fence post just too wide at the top. It made it feel very clunky and overbearing. So hey, this is acrylic paint, no problem. I just mixed up a little of my sky color and painted the sky color back over, and I'll mix up a little of that mid green, and I can reshape that fence post till it pleases me more and fits in better with the composition. It just felt like it should be smaller at the top, not getting bigger at the top. I'm thinking about those grasses that I had put in under the fence, and I didn't like how high they were going up, so I just put a little bit of the background field color back in, and I'm reshaping the bottom of this rail by adding back in those mid-ground tree shapes, a little dark, a little light, just bringing that back in until it doesn't jump out at me, so much of, well, how do you know when it's done or when it's right? I just look at it, and if something jumps out at me, if there's a harsh edge or a harsh color in the background that's jumping forward, I just go in and lighten it up or soften it up. Here I'm doing the barbed wire that's part of this fence, and I want to just keep this very loose. I just want to have that feeling of barbed, old, rusty barbed wire. So I'm using my liner brush again very loosely in my hand. I started with the dark, just did some dots and dashes, not one solid line, not really drawn in, just some loose dots and dashes, and then came over the top of that with a medium color, and now a even lighter color, just touching where the sunlight's hitting the edge of that barbed wire and catching it a little bit. I'm looking at the top of that fence post, and I'm seeing how dark it was against that very light sky, and I don't want that to draw your attention. Remember, darks against lights will draw the eye, and if that's not where you want the eye to go, even if it looks that way in the reference photo, you need to change it up a little bit. So I'm just lightened up that fence post a little bit, and I will come back and lighten it up some more. Right now I'm adding some green, which would be reflected from all of those daisy foliage, would reflect into the shadow of the fence post, so you would see some green colors in there. And now I want to put on some moss to age this fence post even more. So I start with my darkest color again, a very dark green color with a lot of alizarin crimson in it to darken it. And then I add some yellow and some white to that same mixture to bring in the medium color. And now I'm coming in with a very much lighter green color and blending it together there. Remember, you can still blend together for a short period of time with acrylics as long as you haven't let them dry. Coming back in with some more dark until it just strikes me as feeling like some moss growing on there without getting into such detail. Here I'm coming in with a very thin wash of Quinacridone Gold. I felt like the lights on that fence post were still too cool. They were too white. So I just took some Quin Gold, watered it down on my brush, and just washed over those lights, and that unifies the color and gives it a nice light feeling of warm light. So a few finishing touches here to these clouds in the sky around the area where I put sky color back in there to reshape my fence post, and some blue and some of the whites just to redefine those shapes a little bit. It's a sunny sky, and remember, skies are always lighter towards the horizon, and I want my sky to be lighter towards the left because that's the way the sunlight is coming. Adding a little bit of that same color down into the pond as I go, because a still pond like that will mostly just be the reflection of whatever sky color you have going on in there. Adding a little bit of warmer light, so that would be titanium white with a little bit of Quin Gold in it, onto those clouds to reshape them, and then coming back and softening those. You don't want them to have any hard edges because they will draw the attention too much. The final touches, I'm going to come in and lighten that top of that fence post even more, because as I looked at it, it was still grabbing my attention and I just don't want it to. So I think we're almost at the end of our little painting, Summer Daydream, and it's taken me out of the middle of winter and brought me back into the summer field, and I hope you enjoyed it and will join me on my teaching website, paintwithkarenilari.com, and hope to see you there soon. Please leave me any comments and suggestions for the next video. So there's our finished product. See you next time.